When the Empire State Building opened on May 1st, 1931, New York City was trying to convince itself the worst was over. The Great Depression had already torn through Wall Street, banks were failing by the week, and unemployment had doubled. Yet on that morning, former Governor Al Smith stood on the 86th floor observation deck with a grin, flipped a switch, and lit up the world's tallest building. It was supposed to be the dawn of something new, but within months, it became one of the biggest financial disasters in New York real estate history. A tower so empty that locals started calling it the Empty State Building. The skyscraper rose fast, just 410 days from ground to spire, built by Empire State Inc., a group led by Al Smith and financier John J. Raskob, the former head of General Motors. Their timing couldn't have been worse. The stock market crashed just weeks before construction began in late 1929. What was supposed to be a monument to progress became a symbol of excess. By the time the building opened, office demand had collapsed. Across Midtown, skyscrapers stood half empty, and rent prices had cratered. The Empire State was the biggest victim of all, only about 23% leased in its first year. Raskob had borrowed roughly $27.5 million from Metropolitan Life Insurance Company to finance construction, and those payments didn't stop just because tenants didn't show up. Within months, the owners were losing close to $1 million a year, an enormous sum in Depression-era dollars. The empty floors became an open secret. Entire sections above the 45th floor had no tenants. Elevator service was limited. Some lifts didn't even run to the top because there was no reason to. Maintenance staff kept only a fraction of the building operational to cut costs. From street level, the tower looked alive, but inside, many hallways were dark and quiet. Rumors spread that the project had been a mistake too big to survive. Some said the lenders would foreclose and tear it down for salvage. Others joked that New York had built a skyscraper nobody could afford to use. That's where the myth of demolition came from. There was never a formal plan to tear it down. No demolition permits, no architectural studies. But in a city that watched dozens of big projects stall, it wasn't a stretch to imagine. The truth was simpler. The building wasn't about to fall. It was just drowning in debt and waiting for an economy that refused to recover. Inside, the management scrambled to keep it alive. If they couldn't sell the offices, they'd sell the view. The observation deck became the building's only consistent source of income. In that first year, around 1 million visitors came to see the skyline, paying $1 each. The deck earned roughly $2 million, almost matching the building's rental revenue. It became the tower's financial lifeline. Every ticket sold bought another month to survive. Management leaned into the building's image as a spectacle. They ran ads calling it the world's most famous building. They polished the lobby daily to keep up appearances. They hosted events on the upper floors, charity dinners, weddings, anything that brought people through the doors. In 1933, Hollywood helped out. When King Kong hit theaters, the building became an instant icon. The movie didn't fix the finances, but it made the Empire State part of America's imagination. Still, by the mid-1930s, things were bleak. Vacancy hovered around 70%. Entire companies that had signed early leases backed out before moving in. The owners tried cutting rents, but it didn't matter. The city was broke. It wasn't until World War II that the building's fortunes finally changed. The war effort filled every available office with contractors, suppliers, and government agencies. For the first time since 1931, the Empire State Building was full. Even during those dark years, the tower stayed open because Metropolitan Life didn't pull its loan. Shutting it down would have been worse for everyone. The building was worth more standing than scrapped. The observation deck revenue and occasional anchor tenants kept the lights on, quite literally. By the end of the decade, as the economy slowly recovered, occupancy began to climb. In 1931, when Raskob's team turned on the lights, they also tried something bold, an airship mooring mast at the top. The idea was to dock blimps on the roof and turn the building into a gateway to the skies. On September 15, 1931, a small dirigible named the Commodore attempted a tether test. It managed a brief, shaky contact in high winds. Ballast spilled onto Fifth Avenue, and the ship nearly lost control. The experiment ended right there. No airship would ever dock again. But that photo, a blimp hovering over Manhattan's crown, became another illusion of success, a way to distract from the empty floors below. The myth that the building was almost demolished probably took root because of how public its failure was. The newspapers wrote about its losses openly. Financial writers called it Raskob's folly. By 1935, it had lost millions. New York had half a dozen skyscrapers with more space than anyone needed. Some, like the Metropolitan Life North building, were stopped mid-construction and capped at half their planned height. Compared to those, the Empire State looked doomed, a Depression-era relic that might never recover. But instead of collapsing, it adapted. The Empire State Incorporated management team pivoted from offices to tourism. They kept the observation decks open year-round, even through winters when few tourists came. They allowed broadcasters to install radio antennas on the roof for rent. They cut power to unused floors to save on energy. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. By the early 1940s, the tower's finances finally balanced. When peace returned after the war, so did business. The 1940s brought full occupancy, with defense contractors replaced by advertisers, corporate offices, and radio broadcasters. By 1950, the Empire State had added a 222-foot antenna mast, turning it into a major television transmission hub. The same steel spire that once threatened to pull in airships now sent TV signals across the tri-state area. In 1951, a group of investors led by Roger L. Stevens, Henry Crown, Alfred Glancy, and Ben Tobin bought the building for about $51 million, the highest price ever paid for a single building at that time. What had been a Depression punchline had become a post-war prize. The sale officially erased the empty state stigma. Even after it was profitable, the story of those early years never really went away. The rumor that it had been close to demolition outlived the Depression itself. Maybe because it felt like something New York would do, build something impossible, panic when it failed, and then find a way to make it work. The truth is simpler and, in a way, more impressive. The Empire State Building was never about to fall. It was too solid, too central, and too well-backed. What nearly killed it wasn't dynamite, it was debt. What saved it wasn't luck, it was hustle. When you walk past it now, the building feels permanent, like it's always been part of the skyline. But for most of the 1930s, it was a gamble that looked like it might never pay off. Every visitor who bought a ticket to the observation deck helped keep it alive. Every tourist who took that elevator to the top paid a tiny piece of its mortgage. By the time the city recovered, the Empire State Building had survived the Depression, a world war, and a decade of jokes. It stood as proof that New York's biggest mistakes sometimes turn into its proudest landmarks. So no, the Empire State Building was never actually marked for demolition. It just felt like it could collapse under the weight of its own ambition. It was too tall, too expensive, and too early for its time. But it stood anyway, and by the time the rest of the world caught up, it had already become what it always wanted to be, a survivor.